Hi, everyone. Welcome. Glad you're here. Let's talk about parallel processing, parallel compression, also parallel distortion, parallel equalization. Mainly, I'm going to focus on the parallel compression. What parallel compression does for me is it allows to fill in sounds in a way that normal compression can't quite do on its own if you're just using one compressor or even two compressors in serial and chained mode. So when I want a sound, let's say it's a lead vocal. If I want a vocal to really sit in a song or stand up in a song a certain way where it's really compelling and upfront, parallel compression is a really great way to get those sounds right up in front of the mix. And here's what I do for say, a lead vocal. A lead vocal, I get my overall processing done, my any de-poppers, de-essing. I go into an equalizer or a compressor, sometimes the other way around, depending on what I'm looking for. Maybe a touch of a dynamic equalization. If that vocal is bumpy frequency-wise, if it's not really linear enough for me to like, I'll get that going. But then I bring it up in the record and I'll mix for a while. And I want to make that vocal now come forward a bit. What I do is I send that off to another compressor depending on what sort of compression flavor I'm looking at. If a lead vocal that I get is a bit on the cleaner side, then I'll tend to lean more towards something to use parallel compression in a way that will allow me to bring it forward, but with a creamier, rounder sound, a little more saturated, a little bit more vibey of a sound. If the vocal I have is clean, if the vocal I have is already kind of on the dull side, a little bit rounded, a little bit murky, I'll be looking for something that's a bit cleaner for my parallel compressor that I'm going to be sending to, say something like an arouser. I really like that for lead vocal parallel compression. I'll use a DBX 160. And by the way, I'm talking mixing in a digital audio workstation. For me, that would be Pro Tools. So let's say I'm using the arouser. I'll have, say it at anywhere from a 1.5 to 1 ratio all the way up to, say, a 4 to 1 ratio on the parallel compression setting. And I can tweak it a bit. You know, the nice thing about the arouser is that it has a side chain where you can push into the side chain with a 3-band equalizer. You can adjust a tight Q, a broad, a medium Q, and push into it. So let's say if a vocal, I'm going for a sound that's really kind of pokey and upfront in the 3K range, 5K range. Maybe when I add the compression, the parallel compression, that might add just a bit too much within that range on an arouser. So I'll turn up the feed to that side chain within that area. Okay. And I just blend that into taste. It's just a little bit more, sometimes more than a little bit, depending on what it is. And the beauty of it is that without me slamming a vocal compressor, I can bring up all the lower lead vocal word information that's kind of murking. And let's say in a dense production or even a not dense production, when I want to bring those lower level words to the forefront, instead of just slamming the main compressor, a lot of times it'll be two compressors that I'll use on a lead vocal. Sometimes I'll even mult the lead vocal if I want a different flavor or a little bit of distortion on one or whatever. But that's besides the point. If I want to bring up the lower information, hidden words, little syllables that aren't quite there, parallel compression can really bring that forward right up in the forefront and allow it to be heard and more compelling and more of an exciting sound. Now, when I use parallel compression on a vocal, if I'm really slamming it, and on an arouser, a lot of times I may use 3 dB, 4 dB, but a lot of times it's over 10 dB, okay? It's 10 to maybe 12, 15 dB of compression, say at 2 to 1, but it's not going to sound ridiculous once it's blended in because I'm just using a little bit just to kind of fill out that sound to make it more upfront, a little more compelling, what that might do, depending on my attack settings, which will be anywhere from, it could be 1 millisecond, it'll probably be closer to 4 or 5 or 8, depending on what the lead vocal, the main lead vocal is like. I might be adding things like a de-esser to that parallel lead vocal, because it's going to end up doubling up your S's or your T sounds or your F sounds, and it might be too much, even though it works for the main body of the tonality of a lead vocal. It might be too much on the S's. So I'll dip those S's down with a de-esser right across the lead vocal parallel compressor, whether it's an 1176 or an arouser or a DBX 160, whatever it is, to make that more blendable. Also, it might bring up a little more transients within the lead vocal, which might be just a little too much for my taste. It might sound great on the overall lines of the lead vocal, but occasionally if they hit a consonant or a T or an S, it might be a spike that I don't like. So I'll also use things like transient designers right across the lead vocal parallel compressor track. I could use anything from, if I want something fast and clean, I'll use something like a Sonox, I think they're called envelope or involution, or I forget what it's called. For something a little rounder, I might use an SBL de-esser. I might use a metric halo de-esser, whatever I feel is best and works best for that track. I should also say that I'm not opposed to, if a line gets buried on a lead vocal and volume isn't quite cutting it, I'll do some little rides on the actual parallel compressor return also. If I need to dig out a word or a few words in a line or even a whole line or whatever, I will push those up. The returns of my parallel compressors basically are kind of the main elements of a mix. I'll have each fader on my bank of parallel compressors will be a lead vocal fader, a background vocal fader. A lot of times that'll be something like an omnipressor. I just happen to like that on background vocals. And it also makes it a little different than what the lead vocal compression feels like. I'll have a bass drum, I'll have a snare drum, I'll have toms, okay? I'll have keyboards, I'll have a piano, I'll have heavy guitars. I might have a separate one for clean guitars, percussion, loops, whatever it takes to augment anything I want to send, I can send to their associated parallel compressor that'll just be for that track. So on a bass guitar, if I want to add some parallel compression to a bass guitar, I'll just turn up the send on the main bass or off of the subgroup, whatever your mixing style is. If you don't use subgroups, you can send it off the main. I like to send it off of my individual subgroups to a bass guitar parallel compressor, whatever that may be. Right now, I think I'm using a Compex. I really like the Compex, and I'm EQing the return a little bit on that Compex as well with an additional EQ, because I think I'm pulling out a little bit of like 300 or something. It was maybe a tiny bit thick on the last mix that I did, just so I can push a little more into it. And that meter will be swinging anywhere from 5, 6, 7 dB on that bass guitar parallel compressor. On a snare, the same thing. I'll push into, on a lot of the drums, I'm using the SSL Channel Strip 2. I just happen to like the way that sounds as a parallel compressor a lot on drums. And I'm probably not keeping the attack on the compressor in normal compression attack mode. A lot of times I will be hitting the fast attack button because if not, it tends to just give me more of what the main snare drum track with a compressor on it a lot of times is doing. And I don't want to double up on that. I want to fill it in and add a different sort of attack characteristic. So I think on the SSL channel strip, I'm using, I think that fast attack is something like 3 milliseconds right in there, which is great. And the release, I'll be close to the fastest release or the fastest release on that. Also, a lot of times what I'm doing the beauty about parallel compression is it's not just like a mix knob that you would do on a normal compressor across a channel, say, where you have a wet and dry control. I really like to utilize a slightly different EQ, or a lot of times a violently different EQ on the return of that parallel compressor. It adds more flavor, it adds more character, and I can fill in whatever it is that I need to make up what it is that I'm looking for. Let's say on a snare drum, let's say if it's off my subgroups, I'll send a little bit maybe off the verse or B section or not at all, but let's say in the chorus, I want it to really hit like rim shots and really thwack and pow on the snare drum. What I'll do is on the return, I might be adding a little more tight Q 300 or 170 or 200 or something to give it some weight, or another parallel thing for a snare drum is I might be paralleling something like a McDSB AE 600, I think it is, which is a dynamic equalizer, but I will flip the mode so that when a signal hits it, it's actually expanding. So I move it to the fastest attack, and I'll isolate a section of the frequency band, let's say from 160 to 210 or something, and that'll just poke up every time that the snare drum hits. It'll just give it a transient. I can also do that with something like that Sonox transient plugin that I was talking about earlier, the Involution or whatever it's called. And I can really blend in snappy mid-range or lower beef or some top-end zing just when it's hitting. So, I use things like transient designers for parallel as well. It doesn't have to be on the main track. But getting back to the parallel compression, I'll use that across the drums. I'll use it on cymbals. I'll use it on hi-hat. I'll use it on all kinds of stuff to really make things come forward if they need be. If I don't have to use it, I won't use it a lot of times. But a lot of times I will use it. And that little bit, that 5 to 15% more with a parallel compressor blended in, can really give you separation in a mix between instruments. It can give you character. It can give you vibe. It can make things just more exciting. And it can fill out your mix in a way that is really incredible sounding. I really enjoy it a lot. So another thing that I might use in parallel would be distortion. Okay, so let's say I want to use distortion on a snare drum. I'll send it off my subgroups, and let's say I have 4 of my snare groups, or even the main snare, I can just send it to a parallel distortion unit. Let's say like an Isotope Trash. I like the Trash a lot. It sounds great. I can make it sound like all kinds of different characters of that. I can use also sending off a lead vocal. I can use parallel distortion off the lead vocal or guitars. If I want something subtle, I may use something like the SBL, what's it called? Not a true tone. It's got a saturation knob, and it also has a harmonics knob, which is really great. It's Plugin Alliance puts it on. I'm sure you'll find it if you're curious. But I can add a little bit of that, which is more of just a sweeter, granular sort of saturation. Or if I want something vicious, I'll go for something more in line of, say, Massey makes a great little stomp box plugin called THC, which I believe stands for Total Harmonic Character or something. I don't know what it is, but that can sound just really rude, really intense, and has teeth on it. Or the Audiarity makes one, I think, called Pyros. That's a great one for more intense. A lot of times, the standard DigiDesign lo-fi plugin can add wonderful distortion on stuff. And just a little bit, a couple of tenths of a tick, or all the way up to 1 or 2 or 3 on a snare drum, and you can add amazing distortion on stuff in parallel or actually on the main instruments as well. Also, I try to make adding things like distortion, parallel compression, as easy as possible. So if I'm using my subgroup set, my 4 subgroups for each instrument, say a snare, and I want to send off that, those 4 subgroups, I don't think I mentioned it in the video, but those subgroups are actually going to another destination subgroup aux track, which is just all 4 going into that. So off of that, on a send, I'll just turn it up really easy. All I need to do is one send, and I can easily affect all of the subgroups that I have switching within a snare drum or a bass or whatever it is. If I think I'd like to have that amount of parallel processing change, then I can send it right off of the 4 subgroups for each instrument as needed. So that's basically how I use parallel compression. I'll be using it anywhere from a dB or 2 or 3 all the way up to 15 dB and just blend that in if I need a transient, or on a lead vocal if I want to fill that in. I'm not afraid to slam at all. In this video, I hope this was helpful. I think I pretty much covered the basics on how I use parallel compression, distortion, transient designer, saturation. I also use parallel equalization if I need to blend certain equalizers on guitars or vocals or whatever it might be, and I can ride that as well. So I guess that's it for now. Thanks for checking this out. Thank you for being here, and happy mixing. Cheers.